What happens when a self-made titan of industry just wants to read a book by his own pool? For Marcus Thorne, a man who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing, it meant being treated like a trespasser in his own sanctuary. He was racially profiled, publicly harassed, and humiliated by a woman blinded by her own prejudice. She saw his skin color, not his success. But she made one fatal, life-altering mistake. She had no idea who she was talking to. And in the moments that followed, she would learn that the man she was trying to have thrown out didn't just own the pool. He was about to control her entire future. This is the story of how a quiet afternoon turned into a masterclass in consequences. The late afternoon sun over Austin, Texas, was a physical weight, a blanket of gold and heat that settled over the city. From the 40th floor infinity pool of the Azure Spire, the view was sublime. The skyline jagged against the deep blue canvas of the Texas sky, and below, the Colorado River snaked its way through the heart of the metropolis like a silver artery. This was Marcus Thorne's sanctuary. At 38, Marcus was the founder and CEO of Aura Innovations, a pioneer in quantum computing and AI integration. His face had graced the covers of Forbes and Wired, his name whispered in the same breath as tech giants. But the man himself bore none of the frantic energy of his industry. He was tall with the lean, powerful build of a former college athlete. His style was understated, simple black swim trunks, a pair of dark sunglasses, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist was a quiet nod to his success, not a scream for attention. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career, a strategic merger that would position Aura as the undisputed leader in its field for the next decade. The last 6 months had been a relentless grind of 18-hour days, transatlantic flights, and boardroom battles. The ink was barely dry on the contracts, and all he wanted was this: the caress of the warm water, the comforting weight of a worn paperback in his hand, a classic sci-fi novel by Octavia Butler, and the blissful anonymity of being just another resident enjoying the amenities of his home. He had bought the penthouse at the Azure Spire a year ago, a sprawling duplex with panoramic views that he rarely had time to appreciate. The building was a vertical village of the city's elite, oil money, tech mavens, and surgeons with god complexes. Marcus kept to himself. He was polite in the elevator, nodded to the concierge, and was known simply as the quiet man from the penthouse. He slipped into the pool, the cool water a welcome shock against his warm skin. He swam a few lazy laps, feeling the tension dissolve from his shoulders. Finding a secluded lounge chair under the shade of a large palm, he settled in, opened his book, and let the ambient sounds of the rooftop oasis wash over him. The gentle lapping of water, the distant city hum, the soft clinking of ice in a glass from a couple across the deck. It was in this state of perfect tranquility that he first noticed her. Her name was Carolyn Foster. She was a woman in her late 40s with a meticulously maintained blonde bob, a tennis-white visor, and an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. She held the self-appointed, unpaid, yet vigorously defended title of HOA president. From her perch on a cabana couch, she surveyed the pool area not as a resident enjoying the view, but as a warden monitoring her prison yard. Her gaze swept past the young tech bros taking selfies, the retired couple sipping margaritas, and then it landed on Marcus, and it stayed there. Marcus felt the prickle of her stare. He'd seen it before. It was the look of someone running a quick, prejudiced calculation. Black man, expensive watch, luxury building, does not compute. He refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He turned a page in his book, focusing on the intricate worlds Butler had built. A universe away from the petty judgment being cast on him. But Caroline was not one to let things go. She nudged her husband Robert, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed and replaced with jello. He was a senior vice president at Sterling Financial, a regional bank, and his face was already starting to flush with the 2 glasses of rosé he'd had. "Robert, look," she hissed, her voice a low, sharp whisper. "I've never seen him here before. Ever." Robert squinted in Marcus's direction. "Maybe he's new, dear. Or a guest." "A guest? Of who?" she scoffed, as if the very idea was an affront. "People are supposed to register their guests. It's in the bylaws. Section C, paragraph 4. And besides, She lowered her voice further. He doesn't look like he belongs here. The coded language was as clear as the water in the pool. Robert, ever the conflict avoider, just mumbled, "Caroline, please don't. Just relax." But for Caroline Foster, relaxation was a spectator sport. She stood up, her jaw set with the grim determination of a crusader. The fragile peace of Marcus Thorne's afternoon was about to be irrevocably shattered. Caroline approached Marcus's lounger with the purposeful stride of a meter maid approaching an expired meter. She stopped directly in his line of sight, blocking the sun. Her shadow fell across the pages of his book. Marcus slowly lowered the novel, peering at her over the top of his sunglasses. He kept his expression neutral, a mask of calm he had perfected in 1,000 high-stakes negotiations. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even and low. "I hope so," she began, her tone dripping with saccharine condescension. "I'm Caroline Foster, the president of the Homeowners Association. I don't believe we've met. I make it a point to know all the residents here at the Azure Spire." The implication was clear. "Since I don't know you, you must not be a resident." "Marcus Thorne," he replied simply, offering no further information. He wanted to see how far she would take this. "Mr. Thorne," she said, tasting the name as if it were unfamiliar food. "As you know, this pool and the rooftop amenities are for residents and their registered guests only. For security and insurance purposes, of course." "Of course," Marcus echoed, his voice flat. He made no move to elaborate on his status, and this silent resistance seemed to fuel her indignation. Her smile tightened. "So," she pressed on, "which resident are you a guest of today? I'll need their unit number to cross-reference with our guest log." This was the moment, the point of no return. Marcus could have ended it right there. He could have said, "I live in the penthouse," and watched her deflate. But something in her smug certainty, in the casual cruelty of her prejudice, sparked a cold fire in him. He had spent his entire life outsmarting, outworking, and outmaneuvering people who looked at him and saw a collection of stereotypes instead of a man. Today, he decided, would be no different. He would let her build her own cage, bar by bar. "I'm not a guest," he said calmly. Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Oh, so you work here? Maintenance staff are not permitted to use the amenities. That's a clear violation of building policy. I'll have to speak with management about—" "I don't work for the building, Ms. Foster," Marcus cut in, his patience wearing thin, but his voice remaining steady. Her face contorted in a mask of theatrical confusion. "Well, then, you must understand my predicament. You're not a resident, you're not a guest, and you're not staff. That leaves only one option, doesn't it? You're trespassing." The word hung in the hot, humid air. The couple with the margaritas had gone quiet, their heads turned. The tech bros paused their selfie session. Marcus was now the center of a very public, very ugly spectacle. "I can assure you I am not trespassing," he said, the steel now evident in his tone. "I'm going to need you to prove that," Caroline snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "Show me your resident key fob, the one with the Azure Spire emblem." Marcus sighed. He reached into the small pocket of his swim trunks and produced the key fob, a sleek black electronic key emblazoned with the building's silver A. He held it up for her to see. For a fleeting second she looked stunned. But prejudice is a fortress not easily breached by facts. She recovered instantly, a new theory already forming. "It's easy enough to find a lost key," she said dismissively. "That doesn't prove you live here. I'm going to have to call security." She spun on her heel and marched over to the wall-mounted intercom. Robert, her husband, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. He gave Marcus a weak, apologetic shrug from across the deck. Marcus just stared back, his expression unreadable. A few minutes later, a young security guard named Frank arrived. He was new to the job, barely out of his teens, and clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his eyes darting between Caroline and Marcus. "The problem, Frank," Caroline announced grandly, "is that this man is trespassing on private property. He refuses to identify himself and produces a key fob that is likely stolen. I want him removed from the premises. Immediately." Frank turned to Marcus, his discomfort palpable. "Sir, I'm sorry, but do you have an ID?" Some proof of residency? Marcus felt a surge of cold anger. He was being treated like a criminal in his own home, in front of his neighbors. He had built a company worth more than the entire building. Yet here he was, being asked to prove he belonged. He made a decision. He would not just end this, he would detonate it. You know what? Marcus said, finally standing up. He was a good 6 inches taller than Frank and towered over Caroline. His presence suddenly filled the space, and the calm demeanor was replaced by an aura of formidable power. You're right. This has gone on long enough. You should call the police. Frank blinked. Sir? Caroline's face lit up with triumphant glee. Yes, an excellent idea. Call the Austin Police Department. Tell them there's an intruder at the Azure Spire. Go ahead, Frank, Marcus said, his gaze locked on Caroline. Make the call. Let's get some official authorities here to sort this all out. The young guard, utterly bewildered, reached for his radio. Caroline Foster crossed her arms, a smug smile plastered on her face. She was convinced she had won. She had no idea she had just signed her own social and financial death warrant. The 20 minutes it took for the Austin Police Department to arrive felt like a strange, suspended moment in time. The rooftop, once an oasis of relaxation, was now thick with tension. Caroline Foster stood with her arms crossed, radiating self-satisfaction. Her husband, Robert, had reluctantly joined her side, his face a blotchy mosaic of pink and white. The other residents watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Frank, the security guard, hovered awkwardly near the elevator, wishing he were anywhere else. Marcus, in contrast, had returned to his lounge chair. He didn't read his book, but he held it in his lap, a small anchor of normalcy in a sea of absurdity. He remained silent, his mind working like one of his own quantum computers, calculating variables, predicting outcomes, and charting the most efficient path to a resolution. This was no longer about a pool, it was about a principle. 2 officers, a veteran with a weary face named Miller, and a younger, more alert officer named Hayes, stepped out onto the pool deck. The heat hit them immediately. We got a call about a trespasser? Officer Miller asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Caroline surged forward. Yes, officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I am Caroline Foster, the HOA president. This man, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Marcus, has gained access to our private, residents-only rooftop. He refuses to prove he lives here and is becoming belligerent. Officer Miller turned his gaze to Marcus, who was now slowly getting to his feet. Sir, can you tell me your name? Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, this woman claims you don't live here. Can you provide any identification or proof of residence? Miller's tone was professional but tired, the voice of a man who had dealt with 1,000 petty disputes that were a waste of his time. I can, Marcus said calmly. But first, officer, I want to make sure I understand the situation. This woman, Ms. Foster, has accused me of trespassing. Is that correct? That's the nature of the call, yes, Miller confirmed. And she is the sole complainant? Yes, sir. Okay, Marcus nodded slowly. He then turned his full attention to Caroline, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Ms. Foster, I want to give you one final opportunity to retract your complaint and walk away. Right now. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? Caroline laughed, a short, ugly bark. Retract? I'm not retracting anything. I want him charged. I want him escorted out of my building in handcuffs. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the officers. Very well. He didn't reach for a wallet. He didn't point to his key fob. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed directly up towards the magnificent 2-story glass-walled structure that crowned the entire skyscraper. I am Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice now ringing with an authority that commanded the attention of everyone on the deck. I am the owner of Penthouse A. That one. He gestured upwards. I purchased it for $11.7 million in a cash sale 18 months ago. My name is on the deed filed with Travis County. My name is on the LLC that owns a majority stake in the commercial space on the ground floor. My company, Aura Innovations, holds its corporate account at Sterling Financial, where, if I'm not mistaken, your husband is a senior vice president. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Officer Miller's eyes widened slightly. Caroline Foster's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a wave of confusion and then dawning horror. But Marcus wasn't finished. The final devastating blow was yet to land. He looked directly at Robert Foster, whose face had gone from pink to the color of ash. "Robert Foster," Marcus said, the name sounding like a verdict. "Senior VP of Acquisitions and Mergers at Sterling Financial. We haven't met in person, but I saw your face on a dozen video calls last week. Your team has been working tirelessly to close a partnership with my company. A deal worth, what was it? A potential 9-figure capital injection for your bank? We were scheduled to have a final signatory meeting this Monday to celebrate the new venture." Robert swayed on his feet, looking as though he might be physically ill. Caroline stared at her husband, then back at Marcus, her mind frantically trying to connect the dots. The name Aura Innovations was the unicorn her husband had been chasing for months, the company that was supposed to secure his legacy at the bank. Marcus let the silence stretch, twisting the knife. He then turned his cool, unblinking gaze back to Caroline. "You asked me to prove I belong here, Ms. Foster," he said, his voice now glacially cold. "Consider it proven. Now it's my turn to ask a question." He took a step closer, and she involuntarily flinched. "Who the hell are you to question my presence in my own home?" The tables hadn't just turned. The entire game board had been incinerated. The police officers stood silently, realizing they were witnesses to something far more complex than a simple trespassing call. Caroline Foster opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of privilege and prejudice, had just been leveled by the very man she had tried to eject from it. The real consequences had not even begun. The aftermath of Marcus's revelation was not loud or explosive. It was a deafening silence, punctuated by the faint, indifferent hum of the city far below. The air on the rooftop, once thick with Caroline's shrill accusations, was now heavy with the weight of her catastrophic miscalculation. Robert Foster was the first to break. He stumbled forward, his hands raised in a gesture of panicked surrender. Mr. Thorne, sir, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. My wife, she's just very zealous about the building rules. She didn't mean anything by it, I swear." Marcus turned his gaze to Robert, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than cold control crossed his face. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated, the words low and sharp. "Your wife didn't ask for my name and checked it against a resident list. She didn't ask me for my unit number. She took one look at me and decided I was a threat. She called me a trespasser, accused me of theft, and attempted to have me arrested in my own home. That's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Foster. That is prejudice. And what are you doing now? That's just pathetic." Caroline, finally finding her voice, tried a different tactic. "Now see here," she began, trying to summon her usual bluster, but it came out as a weak croak. "Even if you do live here, there's no need for such a drama. Overreaction." Officer Miller stepped forward, sensing the need to de-escalate, though the power dynamics had clearly shifted. "All right, folks, it seems this is a civil matter between residents. Mr. Thorne, are you okay? Do you wish to file a harassment complaint?" Marcus never took his eyes off the Fosters. "That won't be necessary, officer. I'll be handling this myself." He pulled his phone from the pocket of his robe lying on the chair. With a few swift taps, he brought it to his ear. "Jessica, hey, it's Marcus. Sorry to bother you on a Saturday." "Yes, everything's fine. Listen, I need you to do a couple of things for me first thing Monday morning. First, I want you to draft a formal complaint to the board of the Azure Spire Homeowners Association, cite bylaws on resident harassment, discrimination, and creating a hostile living environment. The complainant is Caroline Foster. Yes, the HOA president. I want a motion for her immediate removal from the board and a full review of her conduct during her tenure." Caroline's face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. She had wielded the HOA bylaws like a weapon for years, and now they were being turned against her with surgical precision. "Second," Marcus continued into the phone, his voice a calm, methodical instrument of destruction. "Cancel my 9 a.m. meeting on Monday with the team from Sterling Financial. The partnership is off, indefinitely. Draft a letter to their CEO, David Peterson. State that due to a deeply troubling incident involving a member of their senior leadership team, that exposed a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and presented an unacceptable brand integrity risk, Aura Innovations has decided to pursue other opportunities. Attach a brief, fact-based summary of today's events. No emotion, just the facts. Have it on his desk by 8 a.m. Robert Foster made a choking sound, like he was being strangled. The nine-figure deal, his career-defining achievement, it had just vanished into thin air because his wife couldn't stand the sight of a black man at their pool. "Thanks, Jessica. I'll talk to you then," Marcus said, ending the call. He slipped the phone back into his robe pocket and looked at the two police officers, who seemed utterly stunned. "Officers, thank you for your time. As you can see, there's no trespasser here. Just a neighborly dispute being resolved." Officer Hayes simply nodded, looking at Marcus with a newfound respect. Officer Miller cleared his throat. "Well, Ms. Foster," he said, turning to the now trembling woman, "filing a false police report is a serious offense. I'd advise you to think long and hard before you ever do something like this again." He and his partner turned and walked towards the elevator, leaving the Fosters alone on the deck with the man whose life they had just tried to upend, and who had, in turn, dismantled theirs in less than 5 minutes. Marcus picked up his book and his sunglasses. He gave the Fosters one last lingering look. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The silence he left in his wake was filled with the sound of their lives, their careers, and their social standing crashing down around them. He turned and walked towards the private staircase that led directly to his penthouse, the very picture of a man in control. The quiet afternoon he had craved was ruined, but in its place was a cold, hard, and deeply satisfying sense of justice. The karma engine had been switched on, and it was just beginning to warm up. Monday morning arrived not with the promise of a new week, but with the certainty of judgment. At 7:58 a.m., an email with the subject line, "Urgent," regarding Aura Innovations partnership, landed in the inbox of David Peterson, the chairman and CEO of Sterling Financial. Peterson was a man who lived by the numbers, a ruthless but fair titan of finance, who had dragged his regional bank into the modern era. The Aura deal was his magnum opus, a partnership that would have skyrocketed their valuation and secured their future. He opened the attached letter from Aura's legal counsel, Jessica Riley. As he read, his famously stoic expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, polite, precise, and utterly devastating. It detailed the events of Saturday afternoon in sterile, factual language: unprompted interrogation, racial profiling, false accusations, attempted use of law enforcement for harassment. It named Caroline Foster and identified her as the wife of his senior VP, Robert Foster. It concluded with the chillingly corporate phrase, "This incident reflects a profound cultural incompatibility and exposes our brand to an unacceptable level of reputational risk. Therefore, we are formally withdrawing from all negotiations, effective immediately." Peterson read the document twice. He then picked up his phone and punched in the number for his head of security. "Get me every frame of security footage from the 40th floor pool deck at the Azure Spire from this past Saturday between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. I want it in my office in 1 hour." Simultaneously at the Azure Spire, another storm was brewing. As per Marcus's instructions, Jessica Riley's complaint had been emailed to every member of the HOA board and, for maximum effect, blind copied to every resident in the building. The email server was buzzing. The building's exclusive online message board, usually a sleepy forum for complaining about noisy neighbors or advertising dog walking services, erupted. The story spread like wildfire. But it wasn't just Marcus's complaint. His action had emboldened others. Suddenly, a dozen other stories about Caroline Foster emerged. Mrs. Gable from 22B recounted how Caroline had threatened to have her daughter's family towed for parking in a guest spot for 10 minutes too long on Christmas Day. Dr. Hayes from 31A shared an email chain where Caroline had aggressively questioned the authenticity of his girlfriend's service animal. A young couple in 15C detailed how she had tried to fine them for improperly colored patio furniture. It turned out Caroline's reign as HOA president was a petty tyranny built on microaggressions and abuse of power. Marcus's incident wasn't an anomaly. It was merely the most egregious example. An emergency board meeting was called for that very evening. The Fosters were trapped in their apartment, the silence between them thick and suffocating. Robert had been up all night rehearsing apologies, excuses, and justifications. He had called Marcus's office a dozen times, leaving rambling, desperate voicemails for his assistant. He had emailed, begging for a 5-minute conversation. All his messages went unanswered. Caroline, on the other hand, was cycling through denial and rage. "This is a gross overreaction," she had fumed at 3 a.m. "He's a hypersensitive bully, using his money to crush us. We'll sue him for defamation." "Sue him?" Robert had laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "With what money, Caroline? If I lose my job, we lose everything. He didn't defame you. He told the truth. You did this. You did this all." At 9:15 a.m., Robert's phone rang. The caller ID displayed David Peterson. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Robert," the CEO's voice was devoid of any warmth. "My office. Now." The click of the line going dead was the sound of an axe falling. Robert put on his suit, his hands shaking so badly he could barely knot his tie. As he walked out the door, Caroline said one last thing. "Fix this, Robert. You have to fix this." But as he rode the elevator down, looking at his own terrified reflection in the polished brass, he knew he was walking toward an execution, not a negotiation. The ripples Marcus had started on Saturday were about to become a tidal wave, and Robert Foster was standing right at the shore. The walk from the elevator to David Peterson's corner office felt like the longest green mile of Robert Foster's life. The CEO's executive assistant, a woman who usually greeted him with a warm smile, simply nodded grimly and gestured toward the heavy oak doors. She didn't even ask him to wait. David Peterson was standing by his panoramic window, looking down at the city. He didn't turn around when Robert entered. On the large flat-screen monitor mounted to the wall, a video was playing on a loop silently. It was the security footage from the pool deck. There it was in crisp, high-definition color. Caroline jabbing her finger, Marcus holding up his key fob, Caroline marching to the intercom, the arrival of the police, Marcus pointing up to the penthouse. There was no audio, but the visuals were damning enough. "I spent my entire morning on the phone with Marcus Thorne," Peterson said, his voice dangerously calm. He finally turned around, his eyes like chips of granite. "Do you know what that was like, Robert?" "David, I am so sorry. It was my wife, she—" "I don't care about your wife," Peterson cut him off, his voice rising. "I care about the $500 million valuation this partnership was about to add to our bank. I care about the exclusive rights to manage the personal wealth of one of the most brilliant tech minds of his generation. I care about the fact that Aura Innovations was going to move their entire 9-figure corporate treasury to this bank." He walked over to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was Robert's personnel file summary. 22 years, Robert. You've been with this bank for 22 years. You worked your way up from junior analyst. You've been a loyal soldier, and in 22 minutes, your wife managed to light your entire career on fire, and you just stood there and watched it burn. "I tried to stop her," Robert pleaded, his voice cracking. "I told her to leave it alone." "Trying isn't good enough," Peterson roared, slamming the paper down on his desk. "Marcus Thorne told me something interesting. He said he kept waiting for you to intervene, to walk over and be a man and say, 'Honey, this man is our neighbor. Let's leave him in peace.' But you didn't. You stood by the cabana, sipping your rosé, and let your wife accuse one of the most important potential clients this bank has ever had of being a criminal because he's a black man." Peterson leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished mahogany. "This is no longer about a lost deal, Robert. This is about the character of our leadership. It's about our reputation. The story's already leaking to the financial blogs. Sterling Financial loses Aura deal after executive's wife in racist incident. How does that play with our shareholders, with our diversity and inclusion committee, with the federal regulators who watch us like hawks?" Robert Foster had no answer. He just stood there, a man hollowed out by his own cowardice. "We can't afford you anymore, Robert," Peterson said, the anger replaced by a cold transactional finality. "Your association with this bank is now a liability, a toxic asset. David, please, Robert whispered. My whole life is this bank. Then you should have thought of that before you let your wife's bigotry dictate your future, Peterson said. He pushed a folder across the desk. This is your severance agreement, or rather it was. I've had legal void it. You're being terminated for cause under the morals clause in your executive contract. Bringing the company into public disrepute, that means no severance pay, no golden parachute. Your unvested stock options are forfeited. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes, then they will escort you out of the building. The cruelty was breathtaking. 22 years of service erased. His financial future obliterated. You can't do this, Robert stammered. I just did, Peterson said, turning back to the window. Send in security on your way out. Robert stumbled out of the office, his vision blurry. The executive assistant wouldn't meet his eyes. 2 uniformed guards were waiting for him. The walk to his office was a blur of shocked and pitying faces from his colleagues. In 10 minutes, he was standing on the street, clutching a small cardboard box with a framed family photo, a coffee mug, and a desk plant. The automatic glass doors of Sterling Financial Tower slid shut behind him, sealing his fate. He arrived home to find Caroline on the phone with a lawyer, screeching about lawsuits and character assassination. He walked over, took the phone from her hand, and ended the call. What do you think you're... she started. I was fired, he said, his voice a dead, empty monotone. They fired me, Caroline. For that reason. No severance. Nothing. It's all gone. She stared at him, her own anger momentarily forgotten in the face of this new reality. They can't do that. They did, he said, sinking onto their designer sofa. The mortgage on this place is half my monthly salary. My stock options were supposed to pay for retirement. It's gone. We're ruined. That evening, the email from the HOA arrived. By a unanimous vote of the remaining board members, Caroline Foster was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Furthermore, the board had opened a formal ethics investigation into her past conduct, and she was censured from attending any board meetings for the next 2 years. In less than 72 hours, the Fosters had lost their income, their status, their power, and their reputation. They were prisoners in a multi-million-dollar condo they could no longer afford, surrounded by neighbors who now looked at them with open contempt. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the fall. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. The name Foster became toxic. Robert sent out over 100 resumes to other financial institutions. He got 2 interviews, both of which ended abruptly when the interviewers reached the "Why did you leave Sterling Financial?" part of the conversation. The financial world is small, and the story of his spectacular flameout, tied to a racism scandal with a tech celebrity, had made him radioactive. No one would touch him. The Fosters were forced to put their sprawling condo in the Azure Spire on the market. They had to sell it fast for significantly less than they paid, just to get out from under the crushing mortgage. The day they moved out was the ultimate humiliation. As the movers loaded the last of their boxes onto a truck, they saw Marcus Thorne stepping out of the elevator. He wasn't alone. He was with a group of 4 bright-eyed, ambitious teenagers, 2 young women and 2 young men, all of them black and Hispanic. Marcus was dressed casually and he was laughing, gesturing as he spoke to them. And this is the main lobby, Marcus was saying, but the real work happens in the community spaces and the labs we're funding. Remember, the goal of the Aura Foundation's Next Gen Innovators program isn't just to give you seed money. It's to show you what's possible, to put you in environments where success is the norm, not the exception. Marcus noticed the Fosters standing by the moving truck. His smile didn't falter. He simply gave them a polite, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of nod you give a stranger in an elevator, and then guided his students towards the building's exit, continuing his impassioned speech about empowering the next generation of diverse leaders. The irony was a physical blow to Robert. Marcus wasn't a monster. He wasn't a vengeful tycoon who had crushed them for sport. He was a builder, and the time and energy he could have spent feuding with them, he was instead investing in creating the very opportunities that people like Caroline assumed were not for people like him. He had already moved on. The Fosters were just a footnote in his life, a regrettable Saturday afternoon. But he had become the defining catastrophe of theirs. They moved into a small rented townhouse in a suburb an hour outside the city. The fall from grace was absolute. Caroline, stripped of her social standing, grew bitter and isolated. Robert eventually found a humiliatingly low-paying job as a junior accountant at a small, no-name firm, a ghost of his former corporate glory. Their marriage, built on a foundation of status and money, crumbled under the weight of resentment and blame. One evening, months later, Robert was flipping through channels on their small television. He stopped on a local news channel. The anchor was reporting live from the opening of a new, state-of-the-art community center and tech incubator in a historically underserved neighborhood of Austin. And the primary funding for this incredible facility, the reporter said, comes from a record-breaking $20 million donation from Austin's own Marcus Thorne and his Aura Foundation. The camera panned to Marcus at a podium, cutting the ribbon. He looked directly into the camera, and his words seemed to travel through the screen and pin Robert to his seat. "Success is not about how high you can climb," Marcus said to the cheering crowd. "It's about how many people you can lift up with you. We have a responsibility to build ladders, to open doors, and to ensure the view from the top is something we can all one day share." Robert stared at the screen, at the image of the man his wife had tried to throw out of a pool. He saw the cheering crowds, the hopeful faces of the young people, the tangible good being done. He finally understood the fullness of his and Caroline's consequence. They hadn't just picked a fight with a rich man. They had stood in opposition to progress itself. They had chosen prejudice over decency, and the world, championed by men like Marcus Thorne, had simply moved on and left them behind in the wreckage of their own making. The karma wasn't just in their fall. It was in his continued magnanimous rise. 3 years is a lifetime. For Marcus Thorne, it was a lifetime of exponential growth. Aura Innovations had successfully launched its first commercially viable quantum processor, revolutionizing industries from medicine to logistics. The Aura Foundation had become a beacon of hope in Austin, with its Next Gen Innovators program producing its first cohort of successful young entrepreneurs who were already making waves. Marcus himself had found a better balance, delegating more of the corporate grind to his trusted COO, freeing him up to focus on the philanthropic work that he now considered his true legacy. He was still the quiet man in the penthouse, but his peace was no longer fragile. It was forged in purpose. For Robert Foster, 3 years was a different kind of lifetime. It was a slow, grinding erosion of the man he used to be. The split from Caroline had been inevitable. A bitter affair of lawyers and accusations that ended with her taking what little was left and moving to Florida to live with her sister, her letters and calls eventually dwindling to a resentful silence. The shame of his firing had barred him from the world of finance forever. After a year of unemployment and mounting debt, he had swallowed the last dregs of his pride and done the only thing he could think of. He started driving for a rideshare service. His office was now a 2018 Toyota Camry with 150,000 miles on the odometer and the faint, persistent smell of a pine tree air freshener. His tailored suits were replaced by a rotation of nondescript polo shirts. The power lunches at steakhouses were now lukewarm coffees from gas stations. He drove mostly at night, preferring the anonymity of the darkened city. He had become a ghost, a spectator in the lives of others, ferrying them from their triumphs to their tragedies, their mundane errands to their celebratory dinners. He learned humility in $1 tips and 5-star ratings. He learned about the city he had only ever seen from a corner office, and he learned about the quiet struggles of ordinary people. And in the long, lonely hours, he was forced to confront the memory of that sun-drenched Saturday afternoon, replaying the moment his courage had failed him, the choice he hadn't made that had unmade him completely. One crisp October evening, a ride request pinged on his phone. The pickup was from Trillium, one of Austin's most exclusive and expensive restaurants, the kind of place he used to take clients to close multi-million-dollar deals. The destination was a familiar address, the Azure Spire. A cold knot formed in his stomach, but a fare was a fare, and rent was due. The passenger's name was listed simply as M. He pulled the Camry up to the restaurant's glittering entrance. The valet, a young man who looked at Robert's car with a hint of disdain, opened the rear door. Two men emerged from the restaurant, shaking hands. One was the mayor of Austin. The other, dressed in a sharp, dark suit but no tie, was Marcus Thorne. Robert's heart felt like it seized in his chest. His breath caught, and his hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. He wanted to hit the gas to cancel the ride and speed off into the night, but he was frozen. Marcus clapped the mayor on the shoulder, then turned and slid into the back of Robert's Camry. "The Azure Spire, please," Marcus said, his voice the same calm, resonant baritone Robert remembered with perfect clarity. He was already pulling out his phone. Robert didn't respond. He couldn't trust his voice. He simply put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, his eyes locked on the road ahead, praying that the darkness and the driver's partition would render him invisible. The 10-minute drive was the most intense of Robert's life. Marcus was on a call, and Robert was a captive audience to the life he had thrown away. But the conversation wasn't what he would have expected. "No, the share price is secondary," Marcus was saying. "What I want to know is the community impact analysis. How many local jobs will Phase 2 create? And have we finalized the scholarship fund for the residents' kids?" "Good. And listen, tell the board if they push back on the Green Space Initiative again, I'll fund it myself. It's not negotiable." Robert listened, his chest tight with a strange mix of emotions. This wasn't the ruthless corporate raider he and Caroline had imagined in their bitter postmortems of that day. This was a man using his immense power not just to get richer, but to build things, to fix things. He was everything Robert, in his better moments, had once aspired to be, a leader of consequence. And Robert was his driver, a man of no consequence at all. He pulled into the grand, circular driveway of the Azure Spire. The building loomed over them, a monument to a life he no longer had. He brought the car to a smooth stop under the portico. "Thank you," Marcus said, finishing his call and putting his phone away. "Appreciate the ride." He reached for the door handle. Robert began to breathe again. He had made it. He was invisible. But then Marcus paused. He looked at the back of Robert's head, at the slightly frayed collar of his polo shirt. His gaze drifted up to the rearview mirror, and his eyes met Robert's for a fraction of a second. A faint frown creased Marcus's forehead. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice soft but inquisitive. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" This was it, the moment Robert had dreaded and, in a strange way, rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He could lie. He could say, "No, sir, I don't think so," and the moment would pass. Marcus would get out of the car and disappear back into his stratosphere of success, and Robert could recede back into his shadows. It would be the easy way out. It would be the same choice he made 3 years ago, the choice of cowardice. Something inside him snapped. After 3 years of shame, of running from his own reflection, he was done. He turned his head slightly, enough to be seen clearly in the dim light of the dashboard. "Yes," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "We have." He took a steadying breath. "My name is Robert Foster." The name hung in the silent, confined space of the car. Robert watched in the mirror as a series of expressions played across Marcus's face. First, the faint spark of recognition, then surprise, and finally a deep, unreadable calm. The anger Robert had expected, the contempt he felt he deserved, never came. Marcus leaned back in his seat, studying the man in the driver's seat. He saw the tired eyes, the graying temples, the cheap car. He saw the entirety of the story without another word needing to be said. The consequence of that day was not an abstract concept. It was sitting right in front of him, asking for a 5-star rating. After a long moment, Marcus simply nodded. "I see," he said. The words were not an absolution, nor were they a condemnation. They were just an acknowledgement of a fact, a closing of a circle. Marcus tapped his phone to complete the ride payment. A second later, Robert's phone buzzed with the notification. Marcus then reached for the door again. "Drive safe, Mr. Foster," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing through the gleaming glass doors of the Azure Spire without a backward glance. Robert sat in his car for a long time, the engine humming quietly. He looked at the ride summary on his phone. Fare, $14.50. Tip, $500. The money was a shock, but it wasn't what made the tears well up in his eyes. It was the finality of the encounter. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pity. It was simply an ending. Marcus hadn't needed an apology, and Robert hadn't offered one. The debt was paid not in words, but in the quiet reality of their vastly different lives. For the first time in 3 years, Robert didn't feel the crushing weight of his past. By finally facing the man he had wronged, by speaking his own name without flinching, he had taken back a piece of himself. He was still a rideshare driver in a used car, but as he put the Camry in drive and pulled away from the building, he was no longer a ghost. He was just a man, driving into the night, finally looking forward. The story of Marcus Thorne and Caroline Foster isn't just about a satisfying moment of karma. It's a powerful reminder that our smallest actions can have the largest, most unforeseen ripples. In a world where prejudice still casts a long and ugly shadow, Marcus chose not to meet ignorance with rage, but with decisive, intelligent action that reset the scales of justice. He didn't just reclaim his dignity, he dismantled the petty kingdom of his harasser, and in doing so, reinforced the fundamental principle that character, not color, is the true measure of a person. His ultimate victory wasn't just in the Foster's downfall, but in his choice to continue building a better, more inclusive world. What do you think of Marcus's response? Was it the perfect dose of karma, or did it go too far? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone so thoroughly and instantly turned the tables on their tormentor? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see justice in action, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable real-life stories. Thank you for listening.